And you're listening to Spotlight on the Brumbies of Kosciuszko. And that, of course, wasn't the man from Snowy River. That was Joe Casely with the Brumbies' Fate. So, what is the fate of the Brumbies, Andrew?
Well, it hangs in the balance at the moment, and it really comes down to the Parliament of New South Wales. And we have a Labor government who are on a mission to get rid of every single last horse out of the national park. Yeah. And that's all national parks. That's not just Kosci. That's all national parks. And the government is supposed to be held accountable to law and the public interest. And it seems that neither of those hold any sway anymore with the government. They ignore their own laws as they choose. And they choose which part of the public or the public's interest that they want to serve, as it were. So what we have at the moment is horses being trapped, and we have to submit a GIPA or an FOI request to find out how many and where from. And they don't often tell us. They sort of hold out. And that might be really important information for various groups that follow these horse families.
Holding out on a freedom of information request is kind of illegal, isn't it?
Well, again, it's only illegal if somebody wants to take them to court or prosecute them for not obeying the law, and we don't have that in this.
I mean, if you or I didn't obey the law, I'm certain that somebody would be after us pretty damn quick. Yeah.
Well, go 4 kilometres over the limit in your car, and you get a speeding fine, and if you haven't got enough points or you can't pay the fine, then you can't drive, and that might end your job. And if you don't have a job and you can't pay your mortgage, you might lose your house, or you might lose your relationship. So the consequence of tiny little things, these little infractions, can be severe, and yet the government is what they call the model litigant, the model citizen.
And let's call it what it is. Yes, it's the government, but it's also the public servants, that we pay our taxes to keep them in their jobs, and it's those public servants that are breaking the law, and therefore, from a corporate perspective, the government is breaking the law as well.
Well, the horses that have been shot with bullets that are bought by the taxpayer, and I don't want my taxes buying those bullets. And it's a heavy conversation to have, which we can probably touch on, and then we need to move forwards. We don't want to dwell in this melancholy, but there is a community-funded count at the moment. So if the government's not going to tell us the truth, the community's going to take matters into their own hands, and we'll get up there. We'll go and count the horses, and then we'll table that count to the Parliament and say, here are some raw facts.
And have you got ways of ensuring that is a sort of independently audited number? Yes.
So it's going to rely on several elements. So it's publicly funded money, and this is a GoFundMe that was headed up by Rocky Harvey and Claire Galea. Claire Galea is a statistician. She's a numbers girl, lovely woman. And we talked before, she has a child with some special needs, and she's now got a Brumbie. And the change to her child has been profound. And she's very immersed in this now. She's seen the effect personally. And that's quite often what happens when people get a much stronger personal buy into the situation. They realise the power of the animal and the spirit of the animal and how it can help us. So she has put together a strategy to count the horses in the park. She's read all the reports. She is effectively a peer to review the government's counting methodology, which is easily laughed at. It's insane. So the government has been using National Parks rangers. We're pretty confident that they're rangers. So first of all, they're not impartial. They have a job to the government. And we don't even know if they're the same height. And they hop in a helicopter on each side, and they look out, and there's a stick out the side of the helicopter with taped markings on it indicating 50, 150, 500, 750 metres distant from the helicopter. So if you look out at the marking on the pipe in a flat horizontal line, then what you're looking at is either 750 or 500 metres away from you,
Mm-hmm.
assuming the helicopter's level. Could be banked, could be turning, and they're noisy. You know, they'll waka, 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 waka sound. The horses run. They fly at about 60 metres above the ground, which is barely 2 trees. And Julie, you were up in the park. What are the other tall things? They're grey and they're metal and
well, the electrical
power lines.
Yeah.
Power lines are probably 45, 50 metres tall. So that's a pretty ballsy helicopter pilot to fly around, contour flying as well. And you can see the map that they fly. They track it with a GPS. And there's little loop-de-loops and all kinds of things. And from a transparency or a probity point of view, you'd think that they'd video these flights. They don't. There's only an audio track of the observers talking into their headset as the pilot's flying.
Mm-hmm.
There's no video. There's no photos. And so they look out and go, oh, yeah, there's a mob, 20. There's a group, maybe 5. That's what we believe that they do, because they won't give us those audio logs, of course. And then they add those numbers up. There's no truthing. There's no, here's a photo of the mob of 20. There's none of that. And then they add a multiplication factor for the horses that they didn't see, but they assume were in the trees behind the rocks. And of course, horses and helicopters, they run. There's no fence. They just keep running. What, did they count them again on the way back when they were a bit further over in the track? So Claire wants to be much more accurate, and she wants this to be independently reviewable, peer reviewable, and she's not afraid of that process. That's the scientific standard. So they're going to use a fixed wing aircraft, an aeroplane, flying at 1,000 metres. So it's going to be like a bee, a background buzz. It won't disturb the horse. The horses will theoretically stand in place, eating, grazing, doing whatever they're doing. They won't move. So the aeroplane will fly over in what they call transect flights. So go north to south, south to north on a grid. It's all tracked, really high resolution cameras looking down at the ground. So it's like Google Earth on steroids.
Mm-hmm.
And then that imagery will be accompanied by a second set of imagery called RGB, which is I think it's a red, green, blue contrast imagery to help draw the colours out from the background of the colours of the horses. And then those image sets will be fed into an artificial intelligence machine. And those images will be crunched and processed, and they'll use a process called machine learning. So the machine will then learn what a horse is and what a horse isn't. And as it runs through those video feeds and like an endless loop, it's training itself to understand what is a horse. And then because the imagery is of such high resolution, the working theory is that you'll be able to individually identify the horses from their markings, which means if you did the flight again, you'd almost be able to track the populations and their movements. And then that video overlay with the computer counted horses, the computer will mark where it counts the horses. That'll be uploaded to a website. Anyone can watch that footage. And it's like playing with Google Earth. You can look at the Pyramid of Giza on Google Earth, and you can look at Pitt Street, Sydney. And if you put on traffic mode, it'll tell you where the traffic jams are. Same thing. It's real-time machine learning. Anybody can then play the video, hit the pause, zoom in to where there's a horse counted, and look at that image for yourself and see what the computer saw. And you can either then say, well, that's wrong, or it's right. And we will be able to peer review this ourselves, and it will be forcibly peer reviewed by some other professional industries that do this. That is how you do it. And the government's not happy.
Mm.
Sounds fantastic. It's like a sort of click on all the squares that contain traffic lights type.
prove you're not a robot.
Prove you're not a robot, yeah.
Yeah.
Shall we go over and listen to a bit of Darren Daz Andrews and Brumby?